cyberpunk. Vampires, dead god on Mars. But it's just a bit bizarre to read. So last night I started Daniel Greene's new book, Neon Ghosts, A Witch's Sin. This is his new book. It's a completely new universe, nothing to do with Breach of Peace or Rebel's Creed. This is a cyberpunk sci-fi story. And I am always up for more cyberpunk. I did read the first chapter last night and I thought, However, I got up this morning and read chapters 2 and 3, and I'm really enjoying it, so I am going to film a video on it. However, I did find some of the dialogue in chapter 1 to be a bit disjointed. It just felt like we were jumping about an awful lot. However, it's a lot better in chapters 2 and 3, and I really enjoyed chapters 2 and 3. So, if you are reading this, I recommend reading more than chapter 1 before making a decision overall. It might just be getting used to the style. That's what I think it was anyway for me. But this follows Taya, a woman who is an enforcer, which is kind of like a freelance police officer. It's a weird way of putting it, but that's pretty much what she is. And in this world, society lives in these massive mega structures, which is pretty much this massive box with lots of people living on hundreds of floors. And each floor can be very different. They talk about flooding and some of the issues some of the lower floors have. We don't really know that much about why they're living in the mega structures, other than there is a haze outside that I think forced humankind into these giant mega structures. I am only a couple chapters in, but this is exactly what I wanted it to be. This feels very cyberpunk. People can get wear, which is kind of like cyberpunk sort of implants, so they can get different changes to their body. A really popular one that seems to have come up a couple times in the book so far is glow, where pretty much you just have part of your body glow. I don't know if there's much more to it than that, but you can do that, and it makes sense because a lot of the mega structure is very grey and metal coloured and very simple with not much colour to it. So you find these people who don't get sunlight a lot, so a lot of them get very pale over generations and generations of time. So it makes sense that they'd want more colour in their life. And it seems to be a way for someone to express themselves. But equally, there's also like netting, mesh netting you can put on you to make you stronger, faster, and just more powerful. So there's a classic type of cyberpunk implants wear as well. So there is quite a lot of cyberpunk and a lot of things you would expect to see in cyberpunk, but there's a lot of original and pretty unique ideas as well. The idea of the megastructure outside being a haze, also this idea of glow, and each floor seems to be very different. Like there's one that's sort of like a pleasure district type thing. And the ads, oh boy, I would not want to live in this world. Corporations can fill your head with ads at all time. They can have little jingles and sales pitches going on at pretty much every moment of your waking life, and also in your dreams. So don't think you can ever get away from adverts, but you can buy ad blocks and things like that to filter out some of the adverts. But of course that costs, so it's a privilege for rich people. And it really is a terrifying dystopian prospect, and it's great. And I don't think I mentioned it, but there's also vampires. I did know this, but I went in having completely forgotten about the vampires. So I was reading it and we just came across a vampire, and it was bizarre because you think cyberpunk sci-fi is going to be maybe robots, androids, fine. Vampires? That's a bizarre twist. But somehow it works so well. Vampires are slightly different in this book from what I've gathered so far. It seems to be they used to be people, but then they were infected with this parasite or disease or something, which then changed them into these vampires. That's what I think it is anyway. We've not really met any vampires yet. It's just picking up clues. That's kind of the vibe I got from it. But I must say, all my recent reads have been incredible, and to pick up a cyberpunk vampire book and be really enjoying it, it's just a good time. I'm here for it. So I am about 40% into A Witch's Sin, and I am still having such a fun time with this book. However, I think I was right when I was talking about the first chapter. I found it later on as well that some of the dialogue just doesn't work for me. It feels a little bit disjointed. I feel like we're jumping between topics very quickly, and also there's something I think is a really bizarre structural choice with the dialogue, where you might have someone say something, do an action, and then say something else, and then the secondary character will react to the first thing they said or to the action. And I think this would work if you're watching a TV show, because most of the time you can see that they're having a discussion and people react to things a wee bit later. But when you're reading it, it feels like we're jumping back and forth quite a bit. My mind has moved on from that action. We're done with it and we're on to this question or this statement that you left there. And there are other examples where I just feel like we jump between topics very quickly, or sometimes we jump to a different topic then to just jump back to the first topic again. And I know that people can talk a bit like that, but it's just a bit bizarre to read. And the other thing that's happened a couple of times is different side characters telling Taya how she feels and why she feels that way. And it just feels a little bit unnatural for someone to say that. Most people wouldn't be that upfront. Even if you're really close with people, they're not going to say, you feel like this because your grief is affecting you in this way because of this. Feels a little bit like a telling rather than showing type situation. That being said, I'm still having such a good time reading this. I love Taya as a character. I think she's really interesting. I really like this mystery that we're trying to figure out as we go along. And I'd really like the scenes just hanging out with Taya when she's on the train or she's in a restaurant or she's walking between places and she's just thinking and describing some of the setting. All these small moments are really helping build up this world. It's a very visual story. I think the setting of society living in these mega structures is really cool, and learning more about the implications of that is really interesting. For example, living right on the edge of a mega structure is something that's very sought after on the higher floors, because then you get to see some of the sunshine and you get some fresh air. Whereas if you live on one of the bottom floors, you don't want one of the houses that live right on the edge of the megastructure, because outside is still in this haze and you can't open your windows unless you're above it. No one really has windows to the outside on the lower levels. And how Daniel writes grief with Taya, I think it's really, really well done as well. It's so visceral, and some of the scenes where she's really struggling, there's one scene in particular I'm thinking of where she kind of has a bit of a panic attack and it feels very visceral. But yeah, I'm really enjoying it. I'm interested to see where the plot is going. I can already see little things I'm like, I don't think that is what it is. Think this will come up later. Okay, so this morning I finished Neon Ghosts, A Witch's Sin, and some final thoughts. Okay, I stand by the dialogue comment. I found even later on in the book there was some cases where the dialogue just was a wee bit janky. It was a wee bit difficult to follow, but it certainly doesn't hinder the fun of this book. This book has so much cool factor. It just has things that you go, oh, that's just awesome. It's just cool. The last third of this book was just terrific. Where this plot goes and takes Taya is the perfect example of morally grey characters done really, really well. Because you can see her start to make questionable decisions, even early on in the book. She makes some weird choices that you're like, not sure I would personally make that choice, but I can see why you're making that choice. It isn't until much later in the book when she's looking back on past her, and I'm pretty sure there's even a line in the book that references her saying, I would not have done the things that I've done, or am doing, right when this begun. Because she does change so much as a character. And the way that Daniel does this so gradually is just so well done. And the way that he shows the changes in Taya through other characters and their reactions to her. I should have thought about this, but I'm surprised about how much the supernatural element plays into the plot. I'm not going to talk too much about it because it's really fun to explore and learn more about this world. But just know, it's not a cyberpunk story where vampires are kind of just chucked on top. It's very much an integral part of the story and plays a pretty big role in the world building and the scope of the story. It really gives this book its own flair, its own tone and atmosphere that I've not read anywhere else. It's very much a sci-fantasy type story, and I've not read any other cyberpunk books really, but it does feel very fresh and creative. I do have small gripes like the dialogue and some minor character choices or just ways certain information is given to the reader, but it's just overshadowed by the fun factor. It really is just a fun book. And I am very excited for this series to continue because I know Daniel will just get better and better as a writer, and I already love this series. Inevitably, it will be compared to his first 2 books. What I really do like is that Daniel does have a style and a voice. You could read these and then Witch's Sin and you can tell they were both written by Daniel. It has similarities to his Lawful Times books. However, I do think that Witch's Sin is a lot smoother a read, and I preferred it over both of these by far. So even if you didn't like his Lawful Times books, I would recommend you checking this out. Cyberpunk vampires! Daniel did just put up a video where he's made a return after a short break, and he mentioned something in his books that I wasn't going to say, but because he's mentioned it and said it's not a spoiler, I just want to tell you this because it kind of gives you an idea of how bizarre and wacky some of the world building in this book is. But vampires, the disease that created these vampires, the disease or infection type thing, all came from a dead god on Mars. I told you, it just has cool factor. It just has the cool factor. And I believe he said he's going to do a prequel novella to Witch's Sin where we do get to see a bit of that trip to Mars and the dead god, which I'll be there day one for that. So if you're looking for a fun, crazy world building, cyberpunk vampire book, you need to read Witch's Sin. I'm curious, have you read any cyberpunk books? If you have, please let me know in the comments below. I want to check out more this type of vein of story. So please, if you have any cyberpunk recommendations, fire them in the comments below. There is the official Cyberpunk 2077 book, no coincidence, coming out in August. And yes, I will be reading that. And I know Neuromancer is kind of where this subgenre stemmed from, so I'll probably need to go back and read that as well at some point. But yes, thank you very much for watching. Outro.